It's a game day. It's Pi Day 314. And it's Women in Hockey Night. So much to celebrate on this Friday. Let's talk about it on today's episode of Locked On Kraken.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Happy game day, happy Women in Hockey Night, and happy Pi Day. That's right. Today is March 14th or 3/14, 2025. And, I'm excited. I think that the Seattle Kraken are feeling really great. We heard from Dan Bylsma about some things that are working for this team really in the last 10 games, as far as he can surmise. And again, it's a common thread, Women in Hockey Night. And of course, there's Jessica Campbell, but there's someone else that I want to bring to your attention who will have an impact on the prospects that are coming up in the Seattle Kraken pipeline. Plus, talking about the pipeline, there's this team actually in the state of Oklahoma, where I now live, that I know is not a team that many people in Seattle necessarily, or a franchise that people in Seattle like hearing about, given their history and where they came from, aka Seattle. But I will say that the Oklahoma City Thunder have been getting a lot of praise, analysis, think pieces on how they've gone about being a contender in the right way, air quotes. And it got me thinking, is this something that maybe the Seattle Kraken can lean into? So we're going to discuss that. We're going to start that discussion because I feel like that can be an ongoing conversation, especially given that there's so much that people are really wanting, almost demanding from this Seattle Kraken team. So it's going to be a pretty packed episode. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So let's get into this game day. We're taking on the Utah Hockey Club. They are 29, 25, and 11, 69 points on the season, a 16, 12, and 4 record. And we heard from Dan Bylsma about this team, and he called them, got my handy dandy notebook, he called them skilled and dangerous. A skilled and dangerous squad where the Utah Hockey Club was able to defeat the Seattle Kraken. The Seattle Kraken were able to defeat Utah earlier this season, December 30th, 5-2. And that is something that the Kraken, of course, will keep in mind. But again, Dan Bylsma saying this is a skilled and dangerous team right now. So not to be trifled with. If we kind of look at the standings here right now, we take a look at what's happening in the wild card race in the West. The Utah Hockey Club right behind Vancouver with 71 points. Calgary, who's above that wild card line, also at 71 points. And then the Minnesota Wild at 79. So that's a 10-point jump from where Utah is and where Minnesota is. But, and again, if they were somehow able to get to 79 points, that would put them in where we see LA and Edmonton right now, 79 points for the Kings, 78 points for the Oilers. And, so this is a team that Seattle wants to be able to attack, but more so what we heard from Dan Bylsma is that this Seattle Kraken team has just been playing better. He talked about, there's just more time in the offensive zone. I've been breaking that down, especially after the last game. We looked at the heat maps, that this is a team that's they're moving through the neutral zone fast. I've talked about neutral zone play on the podcast before, and that the Kraken downright have not looked great in the neutral zone. And then he also talked about all of these things being connected pictures. So areas of the game that are starting to individually blossom and grow and get to a place where the Kraken have wanted to be since the beginning of the season, since training camp. now that these things are starting to align, or starting to improve, now they're starting to align into, again, what Dan Bylsma called connected pictures. He's talking about there are more opportunities. I talked about the shots in the slot, talked about the shot volume, high danger chances. We've seen odd rushes go up for the Seattle Kraken, breakaway opportunities. So these are all really good things. Again, the Seattle Kraken, coming out of the Four Nations break, wanted to be playing their best hockey. And I felt that that game against Montreal had a lot of the elements that this Seattle hockey team wants to see. Let's look at the side-by-side comparisons of these two teams just a little bit more. Again, this is a Utah team that, they are a contender. They want to be a contender. They're showing that they've got some grit and some moxie. I talked about the overall record and their away record. They're 6-2-2 in their last 10 games. Clayton Keller leading all scorers with 74 points. McCann and Stevenson now tied 45 points for the Seattle Kraken. The power play has been a bright spot for the Seattle Kraken, and we actually heard from Stevie. He spoke for 7 minutes today, which was awesome. But the power play, what we heard from Dan Bylsma is that we're seeing more puck movement, more quickness overall. And again, in the last 10 games, it's what they've been trying to achieve. And they are getting results, and that's massive for their confidence. And part of what's been working effectively on the power play for the Seattle Kraken is that they're driving to the net. They're getting bodies in front. He talked, Dan Bylsma, that is, talked about Yanni Newman. But we also talked yesterday and heard from Dan Bylsma about, Mikey Simon as another player that's getting to the front of the net, making things difficult for the opposing goaltender. And these are all things that we want to continue to see. That being said, Utah has better stats in both the power play and the penalty kill, 23.7% clip on the power play, and 80.3% clip on the penalty kill. So overall, if I had to give a key to this game, I want to see the Seattle Kraken play at even strength, but I want them to be focused on the four Fs: fun, fast, free, and forechecking. Have to forecheck. Wall battles, 50-50 pucks. We've talked about this all season, but we're actually starting to see the Seattle Kraken do these things with more consistency, and it's improving their game. And it goes back to something that Dan Bylsma said with regard to confidence. He's always wanted his team to do things the right way. We've heard him say, even after losses, that he feels that there are some things that the team has committed to and that he likes that they've committed to. They just didn't get the result that they wanted. The other night against Washington, we heard Jordan Eberle say more of the same. But now the consistency is starting to build, but so are the positive results. And so hopefully this, again, will be that baseline, will be that strong foundation that we are rebuilding, retooling, hybrid rebuilding, whatever you want to call it, that then can transition into the next seasons for the Seattle Kraken team. And I think it's great. I love to see it. I do want to talk a little bit about goaltending. We saw Joey Daccord in the most recent game, great game against Montreal. I'd be okay if we saw Philip Grubauer for all of the reasons that I've mentioned before. I was not at morning skate, and at the time that I'm recording, I haven't seen any updates with regard to maybe who was the first on or off the ice today. But I'd be okay if we saw Philip Grubauer. He got the belt. He gave it to Yanni Newman after the Montreal game. He needs repetitions. And again, the writing seems to be on the wall with Philip Grubauer, but as a team that's not competing for the playoffs and does want to work on some things, I don't see that it harms the Seattle Kraken to give Philip Grubauer a few more starts, or at least have a more equitable split in net as we move forward. We're coming down to the last 15 or so games of the season. So we'll see what happens tonight, but I think it's going to be a good one. I think this is a good, scrappy, young Utah team in a lot of ways and in specific areas that can be a good test for what the Seattle Kraken is hoping to get cooking. I want to talk, though, about the common thread theme night That's happening tonight at Climate Pledge Arena, celebrating women in hockey. And yes, we can talk a little bit about the design. Whoops, that's the wrong one. I did when I was at Climate Pledge Arena last get the decal sticker, but I want to talk to you about the inspiration, which actually comes from the artist's grandmother and ideas of pottery and different ways to be strong yet vulnerable and feminine and all of these things. But in addition to artwork, I want to break down not just Jessica Campbell, but another member of the Kraken family that is being tasked with helping develop our young pipeline. And the reason I want to talk about the pipeline on today's episode is because, again, there have been a lot of think pieces about the Oklahoma City Thunder, and I read some of them. And it's got me thinking, is this something that the Seattle Kraken could do? Leaning into building a contender through the draft. We'll talk about that and more on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Have to start with a good cup of coffee, but you might get tired of settling for grocery store brands that just aren't cutting it. That's why I got my mother to turn to Trade Coffee. And let me tell you, this coffee purchasing solution is next level. Trade is the #1 specialty coffee marketplace in the US, bringing you fresh coffee from over 50 of the country's top roasters. Their experts have taste tested thousands of coffees, curating over 450 amazing roasts. Whether you're new to coffee or know exactly what you like, they'll handpick the perfect match for you. And this is how I was able to score buku brownie points with my mom. I was able to walk her through their online quiz. Yeah, she doesn't like technology all that much. I think also she just really likes me doing it because she definitely finds her way when I'm not there. I digress. I did it because I'm trying to be a good daughter. And in under a minute, they matched her with roasts that were to her liking, dark roasts, whole beans. She likes to grind her own coffee beans at home. And so a subscription to Trade Coffee makes it easy for her. No more last minute grocery store runs or settling for whatever's on the shelf. My mom can get the kind of coffee that she likes every time. And right now, Trade is exclusively offering our listeners 40% off your first order at drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl. That's drinktrade, TRADE.com/lockedonnhl for 40% off your first order. Head to drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl now. Today's episode also brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. And I love being able to utilize FanDuel as a tool to get a feeling of, who are the favorites, whether I'm looking at the PWHL, of course, the NHL, or NCAA tournament time, WNBA. I can keep an eye on underdogs. I can keep an eye on future bets. But either way, I'm staying in the action. So visit fanduel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. And thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Erica L. Ayala here, your host of Locked On Kraken. And women in hockey. As a woman who is a host of a hockey program, has been to a Winter Olympics to cover men's and women's hockey, has been on the broadcasts of Hockey East, NWHL, PHF, and the New Jersey Devils radio. Yes, I am a woman in hockey. I celebrate women in hockey. And that's exactly what the Seattle Kraken will be doing as they host the Utah Hockey Club tonight. Kraken common thread back in action. This specialty jersey that I'm about to show you on the screen, designed by a woman with Mexican heritage. And her heritage, and again, stories of her grandmother or her abuela, are integrated into the theme for tonight. This is what the artist for today's common thread design, Marisol Ortega. She's a first generation Mexican American designer. And she says, I come from a long line of makers, not in the traditional sense, but more out of necessity. My late grandmother, Inez, is an inspiration in my upbringing and work. She was one of the many strong women I know in my life. And she goes on to say, the way she tended to her vegetable garden and flowers with such care um, helped me break this notion of women are strong and can't be seen as fragile, especially when it comes to sports. And that's not always true. A strong woman can also embrace the emotional and embrace fragility. We embody multitudes. And I think it's with this understanding that comes growth and strength. My hope is with this artwork that I empower women, much like the pottery. So that's kind of where you see this outline here in the color. The pottery I often saw from my grandmother's house to be sturdy clay pots that hold whole root systems and beautiful flowers. So I love that. I love that the flowers serve a purpose here. Again, the clay working in the red. I love it. I absolutely love it. And I hope that those of y'all who are at CPA tonight, you enjoy tonight's Kraken Common Thread specialty jersey design. And speaking of women in hockey, of course, there's been a lot of attention. There will continue to be a lot of attention on Jessica Campbell. And she's in a L'Oreal ad. That's a cosmetics company. And you see as the ad opens that she's looking in a mirror in like a dressing room. And you're hearing all of this noise, quite honestly, about women and if they quote unquote belong in hockey and things of that nature. And so I thought it was a pretty cool ad. I mean, Jessica Campbell's someone that I've been interviewing for a few years now. We had her on the show and the Women's Hockey Report at the top of the year. But Dan Bylsma has been such a great mentor for Jessica Campbell, and he was asked about Jessica Campbell today, but I think Dan really took the opportunity, yes, to talk about Jessica Campbell, but more broadly, why being able to have an open mind and to be able to have people with open minds who are in the best service to the sport and its growth and the growth of the athletes is something that has always been a part of his ethos. Here's Dan Bylsma from Morning Skate, again, responding to a question asking him about Jessica Campbell.
Think as people, as an individual and as hockey players, we should be lifelong learners. And to see the faces in our organization and playing in different roles, and obviously Jess on the bench, it's just growth. And it's means we're lifelong learners. It means we're working to improve in every aspect of what we're doing, both on and off the ice. And to see the faces in our organization, it's just it's evidence of that.
I mean, I just really love his answer there because he's opening up to the fact, and Jessica Campbell has said this as well. Some of the first things that she said when she took on this role on Dan Bylsma's coaching staff was that there are other women in the Seattle Kraken organization. Let's not even look throughout the NHL. In this organization that have made history, that are making history. And so if you head over to NHL.com/Kraken, you'll see some of the stories about these women, including someone who we've talked about before on the show. For those who are everydayers and OGers, you've probably heard me talk about Caitlin Parker. Now, Caitlin Parker has done some work in and around Kraken Community Iceplex, especially because she has been involved with USA Hockey and just growing the game overall. But I loved that Allison Lucan who's another fantastic woman working with the Seattle Kraken, but she has a story on Caitlin Parker and why the Seattle Kraken really wanted to engage her as a part of their staff. So I'm going to read from this article from Allison Lucan just a little bit. So she's talking here about in 2023, Parker, along with Lenny Childs, who we've talked about before, joined the Kraken's development camp staff as part of the NHL Coaches Association programs connecting underrepresented communities with hockey coaches. Tambellini watched Parker adapt quickly to the demands of the camp as her attention to detail and work ethic shone through. She was fantastic, Tambellini says. And it wasn't just her hockey specific skill set that made her stand out. What left an impression on other coaches was her ability to communicate and connect with Kraken prospects, which Tambellini says is one of the most important things for his staff. Now, Tambellini, for those who are not familiar, he works with the CN, Jeff Tambellini. He's our director of development. And so he says in this article, he says to Allison Lucan, can you connect with multiple different personalities? And can you find common ground in a quick amount of time? Just how she was able to connect with some of our players on just a totally different level, we were very impressed. And she is someone who is coming up in the ranks, but someone that this Seattle Kraken organization, much like Jessica Campbell, much like Dan Bylsma and his whole I mean his whole way of thinking about hockey is player development. And so here are two women now that are hopefully helping the Seattle Kraken craft what the future of the organization will look like. And that is my transition to in the next segment talk about the OKC Thunder. And I know, like I said at the top of the show, Oklahoma City and Seattle, not the best of friends. There's a history there. But what I will say is a lot of people in sports are noticing that Oklahoma City and the Cavs as well, Cleveland Cavaliers, are two organizations that have become playoff contenders, or excuse me, have become title, not just playoff, they've become title contenders by focusing unapologetically on their pipeline and building through the draft. Now, with all the draft capital that the Seattle Kraken have, we've heard that they're not going to exclusively build through the draft, but the Seattle Kraken continue to, when they are ready to make moves, build up stock so that the prospects that they have in the pipeline, they're not having to use those prospects as quote unquote assets in trades to make the team in the here and now better. And I think that's really fascinating. I want to break down what we're hearing about Oklahoma City and see if there are any comps to the Seattle Kraken. We'll do that as we wrap up this Friday episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go? That happens to me a lot, especially as someone who I book my own travel when I'm traveling for work as a freelancer and independent business owner. And working in sports, I do a decent amount of travel and I have a lot of different expenses, including some of the things that help make my podcasts grow or some of the microphones and things that I use. And so being able to use something like Monarch Money, where it's my personal CFO that's giving me full visibility and control over my finances, it's huge. I started using Monarch Money and the dashboard alone is so different than any other app that I've seen that has told me that I could do things like, categorize my expenses and things of that nature, connect different accounts and see everything in one felt swoop. This dashboard is by far the most intuitive that I personally have ever used. And I love that I can see how much I'm spending. I love the cash flow in real time. That's huge for a business owner. And it's just really easy to manage your money and make it smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50%. That's right, 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, Seattle hockey fans, it's a game day, and I'm going to get you ready for today's game. We talked about the opponent at the top of the show, told you that it's a celebration of women in hockey tonight. So if you see a woman and you know she is at a hockey game or is a hockey fan, show some love. There's a lot going on right now, and it can be hard to be a woman in this society at times, but hopefully we can send some love to just hockey fans, right? It shouldn't matter if you're a woman or not. And so I just want to uplift that and celebrate that. And, again, this Seattle hockey team, I've been frustrated with how the front office has been operating. I have been. I want to believe. And there are times where I'm just endlessly frustrated by what is and quite frankly isn't happening. I'll say it till the cows come home. I think season 2 rattled the timeline and maybe jumbled up the priorities for a time for the Seattle hockey team. And that's why I find it interesting that there are so many think pieces now. The first article that I saw the other day, this is by Morten Jensen, writing for Yahoo Sports, titled "The Oklahoma City Thunder and the Burden of Building the Right Way." And I think it was the word burden that really stood out to me, because how many times have I talked on this show about what Ron Francis says, that nobody wants to be the first GM of an expansion team. He has a heavy burden to bear. I never lose track of that. Just because someone has a burden doesn't mean you can't be critical every once in a while of how they operate within that burden. It's not easy. Ron Francis has told us that, and I agree with him. It's not easy. So I think that's why this article stood out to me. There's also another one in The Athletic. It says, Cavs Thunder show a new way forward in rebuilt NBA. And I'll start actually with The Athletic, because I thought this was an interesting approach. I don't watch as much NBA as I used to back in the 1990s when I was still a New York Knicks fan. But anyway, here's a snippet from the article that I found really interesting. As an old era of superstars begins to fade, the league is retiring the player empowerment era with them. Now, that's very interesting. Very powerful idea there. No longer can max contract stars team up in desirable markets. You want to win today? Do it the hard way through the draft and player development. And leaning into the hard, right? The Jimmy Dugan, it's the hard that makes it great. It's a great movie, A League of Their Own, talking about women in sports on Women in Hockey Night. Great movie. Yes, I'm talking about the movie. The show it had its moments, but I love the Penny Marshall version. Anyway, it's the hard that makes it great. And Zame and I talked about this, right? Maybe about a week ago. What Ron Francis does really well, he does really well. And he believes in player development. He has a knack for finding the diamond in the rough, right? For finding a transcendent player at a really good price at the right time. That is a skill. And he's built up, you heard Tambellini talking about, Caitlin talking. We've heard Dan Bylsma talk about Jessica Campbell, Dan Bylsma himself, and what his approach is. This is an organization that has, if we were going to compare the player development pool to barbecue styles, this is a low and slow, right? They want to cook low heat, cook slow for a long time, and just know that when that piece of chicken is ready to serve, it's going to freaking melt. And the flavors are going to pop and explode. And it will be undeniable. I love that. I freaking love it. And as the Yahoo article says, it's a burden. There is, in the society that we live in, this instant gratification. And when you have, let me I don't, yes, I'm going to go back to season 2, but let me go back to before that. We're talking expansion draft before the team had a name, right as Ron Francis is named general manager. What is another through line that we always heard? That he wanted to build the team in the right way so that when they made the playoffs, they would stay a playoff team. They would stay a team that's competing for championships. And that for me is the burden. It's a little bit of the dichotomy that I believe in the development. I love player development. When Allison Lucan wrote that story and broke down the Tuckman's model, which is a leadership model, oh my goodness, like I love that stuff. I freaking love leadership development or player development. It's so important. I geek out about that stuff. And you have to make sure that at every level of the organization, from the players to all the way up to the owners, down to the players, that everyone's on the same page. And it feels to me that after season 2, the expectations weren't quite aligned for all of the different parties. And that makes the low and slow really difficult. Really, really difficult. Again, in the Yahoo Sports article, this is the piece that stood out to me. During the rebuilding years, which the article defines as 2019 to present, so 2019 to 2025, the Thunder swung a lot. Now, this is where I think Ron Francis gets a few demerits. If we go stock up, stock down on him, some people don't think he swings for the fences. Now, in this article, they go on to say they hit some and they missed others. That was always going to happen. General manager Sam Presti fully realized that the path to success when building through the draft was through volume. Volume. The more bites at the apple, the better. And maybe for me, it's also the volume. I need to do a little more thinking because I don't know that volume is necessarily the issue. I'd have to compare and look a little bit more into it. But I don't know if I think of volume as far as how many transactions, although there are times where I'm like, come on, Seattle, do something, right? I want the Kraken to do something. But then you look at, the little micro moves that have happened. You can look at volume as far as the salary cap. And that's an interesting conversation that I know some Kraken fans like to have. But for me, I think I would remix this if I was going to comp this article about the Oklahoma City Thunder to the Seattle Kraken to think more of maybe not volume, but value. Maybe not volume, but impact. And that's where I think we get a little stuck with the Seattle Kraken. I mentioned Andre Burakovsky a lot. Oliver Bjorkstrand no longer with the team. Yanni Gordon no longer with the team. Brandon Tanev no longer with the team. What are we going to get realistically from Matty Beniers right now, from Shane Wright right now, from Yanni Newman right now, from Ty Cartier right now? And so, this article goes on to talk about how these big swings, the amount of swings that the Thunder are taking, eventually they were able to parse that down to a big 3. The Seattle Kraken are not yet in a place where they have a big 3, but that's where the Athletic article argues a little bit of a different spin, because now what they're saying is that you're building championship contenders by building not around superstars, but by building a team that when they hit the court can be the best team on any given night. And that's really interesting to me. this article from The Athletic is saying, / the New York Times, is saying that what Cleveland and what Oklahoma City are able to do is that they are the sum of their parts as opposed to big three this or big three that. Interesting. Because if I had to guess, at least in the immediate intermediate, so that to me is 0 to 3 to 5 years, maybe that's what the Kraken need to do, is build a team that will work together, whether you have X amount of superstars like a big 3 or a big 5 or not. I think that's closer to what the Seattle Kraken are hoping to do, but the combinations have not been great. Dan Bylsma has struggled with combinations, with line combinations this season. Yes, you have to take into account to some extent injuries, but even at the moments where the team was its healthiest, and again, that was at the beginning of the season, but we saw this also with Dave Haxtell. This year in particular, it just felt like I said it a million times. Jared McCann was getting lost in the sauce. We need Jared McCann to be an effective player. And so having to sacrifice him to a line where maybe his game doesn't flourish, that to me comes down to perhaps personnel challenges. So I don't know. I want to continue with this. I think it's fascinating what people are writing about Oklahoma City, what they're writing about Cleveland, and the Seattle Kraken seem like a team that's going to have to answer where they want to go, but also how they want to get there. Are they going to be low and slow? Are they leaning into the development of it? Seems like they are. But I do think that whatever the plan is, I want to see even more commitment from the Seattle Kraken organization. Hey, that's our show, folks. It's a game day. Get yourself ready. Have your snacks ready to go. And hopefully the next time you see me on the Locked On Kraken show, I will be wearing the UMA hat. But be kind to yourselves. Be kind to one another. And on this game day, a reminder to also hold fast, stay true, loud and proud. We say always, let's go Kraken. I'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everyone.